Yes, here we are. Okay, so
Good morning,
apologies.
everyone.
Good everybody. Sorry, my
We're all
brain is still in
flustered
fog.
today. We're going to talk about the geography of thought, and
This
I'm
one.
I'm on a ship at sea, floating, and I'm lost in this geography of the world. So, but we made it. We are here today live.
We are here today live, and once again, good morning to everybody who is watching us or will watch us in a bit on LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, also listening to us in Clubhouse. It's a pleasure to have you with us. And here we are today with Tim, me and Tim. We're going to talk about a very well, it used to be a controversial book, but nowadays I believe that many people have realized its value and appreciated the value of the book. The book is called The Geography of Thought by Richard Nisbett, something that I discovered only recently, even though I feel a little bit ashamed to recognize this. Tim has known the book for quite a while, and we're going to talk about where Japan stands, in this thoughtscape, the world thoughtscape, based on the book, of course, but based on our own experiences. So Tim's experience in the United States and in Japan, and my experience back home in Bulgaria and in Japan. So I hope that you enjoy this conversation. Please feel free to share your comments with us on YouTube, LinkedIn. Also, if you have questions, of course, share your experiences as well. Yes, Tim, go ahead.
I have not a question, but I want
Yes.
to do a disclaimer. So I read this book like 20 years ago,
Hmm.
shortly after it came out. I just looked it up. I think it came out in 2003. So I probably read it around 2004.
Hmm.
And so, unlike Maya, who just read it, it's not fresh in my mind. So I was going to say I stayed up all night and I reread it, but I did not. I did the
That's good.
lazy way and I asked Chat GPT this
Hmm.
morning, could you summarize the key points of the geography of thought? And
Right.
I asked it to recount a couple anecdotes that were still in my memory, but I wanted to make sure I remembered them correctly. And surprisingly, I did, because I'm usually my memory isn't that great, but I think I remembered these anecdotes because after I read them, I started talking about them in my seminars. And so if you're repeating a story in your seminars, it tends to stick in your head, right?
Right. Yes.
So everything I'm talking about today is either my distant 20 years ago memory of it or my cheat sheet with Chat GPT. So that's my caveat today. But I'm going to rely on Maya mostly to talk about it, and I'll chime in when I think I can make a contribution.
Well, I imagine the conversation going a little bit more as a conversation rather than me talking about the book all the time.
I'll do
But
my best. You know me, I can't shut up sometimes. So, yeah.
well, that's great, actually. It's really good. And once again, I want to say that this exemplifies actually, how things or information is collected and communicated in the Western world and also in Japan. Because Tim, you say that you sometimes cannot shut up. I cannot do. I cannot shut up either. Sometimes, especially when I feel like I like the subject of the
Yeah.
conversation and so on, because we rely mostly on. Ourselves to make ourselves understood. So we want to talk and explain as much as possible. While here in Japan, people rely mostly on receiving information and reading the information even when it is not conveyed verbally. So maybe this is the very first point which we can actually talk about. But before that, I would like to say thank you to our sponsor, first sponsor, and that is Kanchu.com, and of course, James Howell. You have already met James, I believe, but if you haven't, he's on LinkedIn and you'll find also his contact details in the description of the YouTube video. And James represents Kanchu, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku, a company that is based in Yokohama and offers bilingual services in Japanese and English to people who have projects in the field of real estate, who want to buy or sell real estate in Tokyo and Yokohama. They also do property management and investment property. So feel free to reach out to James talk with him either in Japanese or in English and see how he can help you with your project.
And follow James. He's got the coolest posts. He
Yes.
makes very thoughtful posts and reflective posts, but he also puts a lot of cool pictures of some of the homes the company has designed in the
Mhm.
past, and they're just stunningly beautiful. It looks like
Yes,
something you see on a Hollywood set, you know. So just for that, it's worth following James.
it
So
is, yes.
yeah,
And who knows, even if you don't have a project in mind this year, you may have one next year or 5 years down the road, and James still will be here. So,
yeah, yeah.
yes.
Very good.
Oh, yes,
Shout out to
great.
our sponsors. So, Mike, can I make one quick point? Because you were talking about,
Yes.
you know, we talk, we explain things, and in Japan, you got to kind of the receiver, you know, has to
Mm-hmm.
interpret things. And this one of the what buried hidden assumptions that we all
Yes.
take for granted, both cultures, not just America, but Japan and Bulgaria. In my culture, I was always not even taught; it was just kind of implied
Mm-hmm.
that for communication to happen properly, the onus is on the sender
Mm-hmm.
to make sure it was communicated properly. And in Japan, there's more of a burden on the receiver to understand the information. In other words, we're putting more responsibility on different people. In my culture, it's the sender, and in Japan culture,
Yes.
it's more the receiver. And that, so example, in America, if a teacher teaches
Mm-hmm.
and every kid fails the test, most teachers are going to say, well, I must not have properly taught it since everybody in the class failed. So it's on me, the teacher, right?
Right.
And I tend to think that Japan would be like, what are you students? How could you not learn it? You know? Um, and you know, I mean that in a loving, nice way. You know, I'm not.
Right. Yeah.
So does that resonate with you? That framing?
Mm. Very much, yes, it does. But you know, Tim, I also think it's interesting to mention one thing. So once again, going back to the book, based on what you just said, is
Yeah.
that in the book, Richard Nisbett says that basically, well, the Eastern Asian cultures and the American culture are on the two opposite side of the spectrum. And then it's like a 180-degree difference in all the vectors that we have in society, the communication also, the way we behave towards other people, or how we perceive family, how we perceive friends, how we perceive ourselves. And also he mentioned that it is basically, if you start moving from the East Asia, towards the West, you see a gradual change in these values. And so eventually, when you get to the United States, you get to the other, well, he didn't call it extreme, but the other end of the spectrum.
Right. Right.
So I'm saying this because back home, I remember, when I got a mark which was not satisfactory to my mother, she would say, "What did you do in class? Why didn't you listen? So why didn't you listen to the
Right. Right.
teacher?"
Right. 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 Right.
Right? So, which is, I think that we're in between, the United States and Japan, and also the other Eastern Asian countries here.
Let me
So,
ask you though, could it also
yeah.
be generational? Because I feel
Mhm.
like even within America,
Yes.
I almost feel like when I was a child, kind of like what you just said, I felt like my parents were saying, listen to the nuns.
Hmm.
It's kind of on you to learn, like
Yeah.
maybe shifted. And I'm not saying it's
Hmm.
a bad thing. I think
Right.
it's a good thing I believe, because those are
Hmm.
my cultural values, to put the onus on the speaker
Hmm.
to get them. I think that's a good thing, but I don't, not like you triggered a memory, and I feel like, wow, maybe my generation was not the same as today, and on that front.
Maybe. Yeah, maybe that's because, and that's also exemplifies another point, Tim. And it's really fascinating how this conversation goes, from, this point to the other point. But the thing is that basically, again, when we talk about our environment, the funny thing is that the Japanese, the Chinese, and Koreans, they see everything as a change. Everything is in a flux. It's fluid, and things change all the time. And I think that what you just said about generations just exemplify that point. The thing is that we in the West do not want to, or probably do not have the awareness of this change, and do not recognize it as a
Right,
change all the
right,
time,
right,
right?
right.
While here in this part of the world, people are always aware of it, and they are geared towards, their perceptions are geared towards recognizing the change and actually acting based on what they perceive at any certain point of time. So, which is
Mhm.
very interesting. And yes, probably that's generational, as you said, right?
Yeah.
So,
There was
because
more. There was more trust in authority when I was younger,
there was,
and
yes.
I'm talking like the early '60s. I was born in '58, so I'm
Mhm.
talking kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade, right for me.
Yes, yes.
And after the Vietnam War,
Mm,
all the protests, I saw a shift toward authority.
mm,
Like there was less trust, and so maybe that had something to do with it. But
right.
okay, interesting.
Yeah, it's interesting. And do you think, because now you live in Japan, right?
Right.
And we are both in Japan. You have been here for 6 years after coming back from the United States, and you
Yeah.
were here also in the late 70s, right? So do
The
you
late '70s to late '80s, 10 years.
late 80s, yes. Do you perceive that there is such a trend here in Japan as well, that there is less trust in the authorities? Because we can compare the East and the West. So the East is still very much, hierarchical. The society is hierarchical. The organizational structures here are based on hierarchy and so on. But do you think that there is a certain change based?
I was in my bubble, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And my bubble was, progressive musicians, almost like
Okay.
peripheral, like hippies.
Mm-hmm.
So most of them were never, in my memory, Japanese are harder on their own culture than I ever was, and they were anti-politician. They just didn't like any of the They didn't trust them, right? But
Mm-hmm.
I'm not saying that's representative of the society as a whole, because when I came here, Japan was humming, man. The late '70s, they were on the rise, and people trusted their companies. They
Right.
trusted, right? And I think a big shift in Japan happened when the bubble burst, because a lot of these guys, I was there when they were going to work with pride and a sense of purpose and rebuilding the country, and they were so proud. Japan #1, and it was a phenomenon to see them in the 1980s. And so when things are going well, you're going to say, "Hey, oh, we better keep trusting the company.
Mm.
They've done us well." And then a Japanese friend told me this. He goes, "Tim, these we had this sense of pride, and then after the bubble burst, it's almost like the salarymen on the train now were hanging their heads low, and they had lost their confidence." And he
Mm.
goes, "And our children saw that, and it was this subtle change." So I don't know if people agree or disagree. I'm just saying, from where I stand, those are those are probably my key
Mhm.
observations. Maybe there's less trust in the kaisha, you know, less trust in the economic system. Maybe
Mhm.
just a thought. I don't know. You're thinking, because that's when you came in, like early 2000, right?
I did, yes, 2001. And yes, I have worked predominantly in Japanese organizations. So
Right.
for me, I saw that there was so much more trust as compared to the people back home, right? But
Yeah.
this is my base of comparison. This is either Japan or Bulgaria, or some other European countries. And also at the same time, I have also seen that nowadays the younger generations here, they are much more mobile, and maybe that actually is a symptom of what you just said, that the trust in the organizational structures has decreased. And well, probably also what you said, that after the bubble economy burst, so the Japanese were more like kind of ashamed that they failed as a group, not really as
Yeah.
individual, but as a
Yeah.
group, as a society, or maybe as an economy, that. And so that's another thing, that basically I think that everything here is about helping the group, helping the society, helping the community to succeed. And
Yeah.
when you cannot do that when the society fails, and the Japanese society hasn't failed. Okay, I'm using extreme
Right. Right. Right.
words and expressions, but compared to the time up until the 80s, so basically there was a burst, and they perceive it as a failure. So
Right.
I think that maybe that makes them feel that pressure. And then
Yeah.
I think that I'm sorry to make this reference, but I have seen also how the economic situation in Europe, also in the United States, is getting worse, and still, as a society, nobody feels that pressure, right? Or
Oh, societally, like,
as a
yeah,
society,
yeah, yeah,
yes,
yeah. No, yeah,
yeah,
right. I agree with that. Yeah.
right. So it's really, I mean, different side of the spectrum once again.
And yeah, and just to add a little bit of nuance,
Hmm.
professionally, I worked with the big companies, and they were the traditional manufacturing companies. So they were more
Hmm.
traditional than, it's different world than IT and all that, right?
Yeah,
Um, in those sectors, those very specialized sectors,
yeah.
there was lifetime employment. I mean, there was probably more part-time workers too. Those were
Hmm.
added as a cushion to avoid layoffs,
Right.
because technically when you tell people, don't come in, you're a part-time worker, you're not laying them off, right? That became like a kind of a cushion. And
Hmm.
those definitely increased. But still, the people who were hired as a kaishain, a shain,
Shine,
they
yeah.
do enjoy, there's this assumption of lifetime employment. There's this assumption that, and it's not for everybody, unfortunately. Sometimes women don't get that,
Mm,
so it's not like universal, but there is still a sector within Japan that enjoys that. But I think if we talk to Joe Hug, he's on top of stats. He would probably tell us, yeah, it's reduced, but
hmm.
all the stats say that lifetime employment has been reduced. Is
Yes,
that correct? Right?
it is correct. Yes, more companies are actually thinking about hiring mid-career employees, and still, even when, so I think that there is a distinction here. Even mid-career employees are hired as shine, but
Right.
they do not stay very long there. So the workforce here has become more mobile. Uh,
More, yeah.
yes, than it used to be. But at the same time, I believe that it's really interesting how, in terms of business organizations, basically, when we talk about employment, both from the perspective of the company and the perspective of the employee. So there is that, let's say, the closing the gap between the Japanese way of thinking and the Western way of thinking.
Yeah.
The gap is getting narrower, but I don't think that it will disappear entirely because at the end of the day, when you hire employees lifetime, like you give them that option, some people will still be there. And the funny thing is that even in Western companies, those big companies like Starbucks, for example, and some other, I just cannot come up with a name right now. But the funny thing is that when the company hires a new CEO from outside, more often than not, basically that CEO can fix the trouble the company is just in the short term,
Right.
and then it goes, the fact, that's the all the other, basically the bottom line once again goes down, or it becomes worse after that short term. And when a company wants to really get a long term improvement, they pick up somebody who has been with them for 20 or 30 years. And this tells you, basically, this is the way of thinking of the Japanese companies, right? Because they usually not hire, they actually promote people to top management from within their own rank and file.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. That's so it's funny because this, how would I say this? The system that evolved
mhm,
is not the root cause of it, in my mind. Okay.
right.
And I think the cultural factors, here's like, I always had this thought experiment.
Yeah.
Let's say I'm the best engineer that Honda, just randomly, Honda ever
Hmm.
produced. And I decide mid-career, I want to go work for Toyota. And let's assume that somebody at Toyota recognized my accolades, which I'm playing make believe here. And
Yes.
now I go in, I'm hired now. Think about the cultural barriers of being an outsider, just being parachuted in the middle of these guys who have this company culture that has
Yeah.
evolved. They're proud of their culture. And
Hmm.
do you think they're going to say, oh, we can learn so much from this guy? Or who does this guy think he is? We're the best company. You know what I mean? So just like the
Mm.
social and cultural challenge alone, aside from the structural
Oh,
issues,
yeah. Yes.
seems like quite a challenge.
It is quite a challenge. And you know, just this Saturday, this past Saturday, so I met a bunch of people I studied together with. And among them, one of my colleagues there, she has worked for a huge alcohol producer here in Japan for 24 years already. And
Wow.
she, yes, and so she is now, well, in the upper ranks of the middle management.
Nice.
Very
Yeah.
nice, yes. And so we talked about, okay, so what are you going to do from now on? You know, you finish school and so on. And she said, well, I want to change something, you know. And I said, are you thinking about changing the company? And she said, no, because I don't have confidence that I can be successful in any other company here. So what I want to do is I want to go to a subsidiary of our company overseas. And this will be a huge change for me.
Nice.
So, yes, so which once again tells you that, you know, she said, I'm not confident that I can succeed in any other company, Japanese here.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and when I asked her why, and she said, well, because what I have learned applies only to my company, you know, so it doesn't
Yeah.
apply.
Yeah. I mean, you're indoctrinated into that culture.
Yeah,
I'm telling you, I've been to Honda, I've been to Toyota, they're different. They just
they are
act
different.
differently, you know. They talk differently, you know, like
Mm-hmm,
just Honda, I didn't feel the rank consciousness that I felt in
mm-hmm,
other companies. I don't know
right.
why. And I talk to Honda people, oh, yeah, we're pretty loosey goosey on that. Like
Mm-hmm,
that's what they tell me. So, you know, it is a big difference. Like
yeah.
these cultures within, you know, each company.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yes, but it also tells me, in talking with that colleague of mine, and also thinking about, you know, the companies you have worked with. So basically, for them, it's not the individual who stands out, right?
Right.
It
Right.
is basically the individual is part of the whole, and
Yeah.
so they, I mean, those people, the employees there, they don't feel like free agents. They don't feel like somebody who
Right.
can leave the company and succeed because they have learned all those things.
Yeah.
So the Westerners, on the other hand, they're free agents. They think that they're in control of everything, of the environment, they're in control of their own lives, they're in control of their own knowledge. And so wherever they go, of course, they can contribute, they can add value and so on in their own unique way. For
Right.
the Japanese, that's not the case. It's the other way around.
Yeah.
So they are
Yeah.
there because they're part of the whole, and they can survive because they're part of the whole.
They're a
And this is
fraction of the whole.
a fraction of the
Mm.
whole. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
And so this has been, I think that this is so deeply ingrained in the Japanese and, of course, East Asian minds that you cannot just get over it. If you
Yeah.
were raised in this part of the world by, you know, native Japanese or Chinese or even Koreans, just that's a huge, I would say, part of your mindset,
Can
or that's the base.
Yeah, I was gonna say, could I illustrate the point you just
Yes.
made with a
Hmm.
story?
Yeah.
Okay.
Please. Yes.
So I ran a factory in the US for 4 years,
Hmm.
and we had, you know, if somebody came up, for example, with a great Kaizen idea. Now, this is an American company, but lots of people from different countries, right? So if somebody came up with this great idea that got us like a big boost in productivity or quality, I would recognize the person in the cafeteria, not employee of the month. I didn't do that, but still in front of everybody. And I would like acknowledge their contribution, and everybody would clap. And if we had a big bump, okay, I'm buying everybody pizza today, like that
Mm-hmm.
kind of thing, right? A Japanese person, if you brought them up in front of the company and started praising them individually, they would be horrified and they'd be going like, "No, no, it was my team, and I couldn't do it
Right.
without you, and I don't want to be the nail that sticks up, and I don't want to
Mm-hmm.
look selfish." So I have to like give credit. And Ichiro won like Rookie of the Year when the first year he played. And in his interview, and he's considered kind of cocky by
Mm-hmm.
Japanese standards, but by American standards, he was like super humble. Oh man, my teammates, I couldn't have done without them, right? And so, whether you believe it or not, society wants you to say that,
Yeah.
and they do. I believe they do at a deeper level believe,
Mm-hmm.
because they understand. I know you're going to get to this point, the importance of context,
Yes.
and it's not just about you. Like without your parents, you don't exist. So nobody's independent. You can't be
Mm-hmm.
independent, no matter how you slice it.
Yeah. Well, that's yeah. Nobody is independent. Everybody is interdependent. So that concept here is that well, basically, you are part of the whole. You are a fraction of the whole, and that whole constantly changes. And if you want to really help the whole succeed, you have to do your own part,
Yeah.
so that you help everybody there to
Yeah.
be yeah. But also it was interesting to me in the book, Tim, that I'm going to talk about an experiment about what you just said a little bit later, but what was interesting to me in the book is that basically it's just people in this part of the world, East Asia and particularly in Japan, as you said, they always look at the context and how the relationships between events, between objects, between people change. And so it is also fascinating to learn that in the book, Richard Nisbett writes that because the Westerners think that they can control their environment, they get this pressure to stand out and to be unique, and also
Hmm.
to impose their own thoughts upon others, because it is also part of controlling the environment, of them feeling, it's very important for Western people to feel that they're in control. And then here in Japan, basically, it's not the case. There is almost or very little societal pressure on the individuals to stand out. And
Hmm.
so, and there is very little pressure on the individual to feel that they're in control, right? So,
Hmm.
which is also interesting. On the other side, of course, on the other hand, there is that peer pressure here in Japan. So, which is no less, important. Actually, it's probably more important, and that's why we call that we call the Japanese society a pressure cooker.
Yeah.
But
Um,
it's here. So the pressure is in the United States, it's on the individual to be unique, and then in Japan it is on the individual to blend and help, but be just like everybody else and do their fair share of the work.
and Maya, you've brought this up before, but
Mm-hmm.
part of that idea of not expecting to control your environment has got to come from earthquakes,
Yeah.
typhoons,
Mm-hmm.
tsunamis. You know, um, when you live in a disaster prone area, you're
Yeah.
going to tend to think that stuff is out of your control. And I saw this with the Hawaiians as well.
Okay.
And Americans often get frustrated because when something goes wrong, the Japanese will often say, "Oh, Shoanai." They're accepting the reality, and the Americans are like, "No, Shoanai, like I can do it," and sometimes I catch myself doing that. And now sometimes maybe there are things within your control that the Japanese are akirame ga hayai sometimes, but I say
Mm-hmm.
that in a good way, because sometimes you just gotta like accept something to so you can move on, right?
Yeah.
Um, Your thoughts on that, like the weather and the conditions of Japan?
Oh yes, well definitely. I mean, you cannot control any of the weather and what's that the geo. I'm
Yeah,
stuck for words.
yeah,
The
the
natural,
natural disasters, right?
the natural disasters, yes.
Right.
And as long as you cannot, you just try to be prepared for it. And yeah, I mean, psychologically prepared because the Japanese are psychologically prepared for them.
Right.
And we saw it during the Daishinsai, the great Northeast Japan earthquake, East Japan earthquake, actually in
Yeah.
2011. And as you say, akirame ga hayai, but that is because they need to move on.
Right.
You-
There's nothing
Yes,
you can do about it.
yes. I
Um,
remember, yes, I remember back then after the earthquake and the tsunami and also the nuclear power plant disaster that there were so many Westerners living here who were just like, how can they say this or that? And those were, forums on social media.
right,
And
right.
many people just couldn't get it. And also another thing is the other day I was thinking because I just saw the sky tree here in Tokyo, and that sky tree basically it was built in a very short time after the earthquake. And so
Right.
they built it because they wanted basically that the government here wanted to make it a symbol of renovation, and hope and everything. But
Yeah.
many foreigners didn't get it, and there was so much criticism.
Huh.
And of course, among the Japanese too, but not that much as among the foreigners, because they would say, what is this? How can you spend so much money on something that is not necessary and not help the people in the disaster hit areas? And the people, yes, the renovation there, not the renovation, the recovery in the disaster hit area was slow, but it was slow not because of lack of funds. It was slow because of the scale, of destruction. And so it took a long time actually to recover and so on. But the thing is, once again, it wasn't like, I want to say that yes, the government knew that they had to also help the recovery there, but they also knew that it should be, they should give a hope, some hope to the people here. And basically, so I can say that in an indirect way, it connects to what you said, akira mega hayai, because the
Yeah.
people, in the rest of the country realized that they cannot dwell on everything that happened on that March 11th, right?
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
they had to move on, and that was their way of moving on. One of the many ways, actually,
Yeah.
to
You
move.
know, on a related note, so in 2014, I was living in Hawaii, and
Yes.
there was a lava flow creeping down the mountain. It was headed right on target for my
Mm-hmm.
house. And we were watching this throughout the whole year. And the difference in how the local Hawaiians, this is the goddess of the volcano, Pele, and, how they look at the world
Yeah.
versus how Westerners who were transplants, mostly from the mainland,
Mm-hmm.
USA, were viewing this event. Okay.
Yeah.
And I had everything to lose, but to me it was like I'm going to go with the locals because this is their country and their generation. So that's just me. I'm not telling everybody they should do it. And so I was just as an anthropologist, I was observing, and the Americans, we would have these monthly forums, and they would have the county come in with a scientist and explain the geology and explain what was happening, and as best they knew it, what they thought was going to happen. And then they would have question and answer, but they would say, we're not going to try to divert the flow. We don't think it's possible. And also, we got to be sensitive to the local Hawaiian religion, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if we do divert it and go somewhere else, we're going to get sued too. They didn't say that, but that was kind of
Mm-hmm.
implied, right?
Okay.
So the Americans are saying, because it was leaking out of this crater at the top of the mountain, and the Americans are like, let's bomb the other side of the crater with a missile so the lava all drains out and flows the other way. Like
All
people are
right.
coming up with these ideas, right? How to control nature, how to control,
Yeah.
the goddess. And the Hawaiians are like, are you out of your mind? Yeah, we can't do that. And here's how the Hawaiians deal with it. This is how mentally how they deal with it. They say, without Pele, without the goddess, we wouldn't have this island. So we are just like kind of temporarily renting it from Pele, and Pele wants to take it away. That's her prerogative. And so we will welcome her as a special guest. I'm serious. This is how they look at it.
Right.
So in their mind, they're just saying, this is a reality. I can't change it. I'm going to put a positive spin on it by saying this deity within my religion, I'm inviting them to my house, a positive thing. And if they come, I have to be honored. You know what I'm saying? Like
Yeah.
psychologically, how your culture conditions you. And I always thought the Hawaiians and the Japanese have a lot of connecting points as they're very collective cultures. They have the same geography of disasters that come upon
Right.
them, and they just have that akirame. Yeah. Anyway, just a little side note anecdote. But let's
No,
get
I
back to
love
that.
it. I love it because that's also another very important point in the book that basically we are a product of the cultures we grew up in, and then cultures are also shaped by the physical environment, of course, but also, we cannot alter the physical environment. The one thing we can do is to adjust to it. And of course, sometimes, our willingness to adjust to it is, it comes at different levels. And once again, in, the Greek, basically, so Richard Nisbett argues that the Western habit of thought is based on the Greek
Yeah.
mythology, philosophy, and the ideology there, which basically sees everybody as a free agent and as somebody who can control, what is happening with them and around them. But that's probably also because they didn't have so many natural disasters there. That's old Europe, and Europe is the oldest of continents, so we don't get that many earthquakes. We don't get that many, floods. Or, I mean, I come from that part of the world, so I know it. And anyway, before we continue, Tim, I want to say thank you also to Houze Inc.
Oh yeah, we passed due. I forgot to set my clock. I'm sorry. Okay, we got to do that.
Yes, to Houze Inc. and also Hana Urushizawa Howell. So a big, big, big heartfelt thank you to Hana and the company. So of course they are our second sponsor. You have already heard about them, and you probably already know that Houze as well offers bilingual services in custom home design, construction, and renovation. They also work in commercial building construction. So reach out to Hana if you need any such services and talk with her, either in Japanese or in English. So she will do everything possible to hear you out and to actually customize their services to your needs. So, Hana, thanks a lot to you. Thanks a lot to Houze Inc. And we'll move on now from this plug to the next part of the conversation. So, yes, Tim, we were talking about the environment and how it shapes our ways of thinking.
Could you
And
refresh my memory? Did
yes,
did Nesbitt talk about the significance of not Catholicism, but Christianity in terms of God loves you as an individual? You know,
no, I
and
haven't seen that yet. I
okay,
still have a bit of the book to finish, but up until this point of time, he talks about the ancient Greeks, and also he talks about Taoism and Confucianism and Buddhism as well.
right, right,
So, and
yeah,
yes, a little bit, there is a chapter about religion a little bit later. It's towards the end of the book, and
okay,
you have to, yes, to
yeah.
get there. But yeah, it's a lot about it. And
And the
Christianity,
Protestant Reformation, right? A lot of that was about the individual being talked directly. You talk to God. You don't have to
right,
go through a
yes.
priest. You know,
Hmm.
so I thought maybe that was nothing is a cause. Everything was probably a symptom of a previous generation that was sort of going in that direction, right?
Yes, yeah.
But okay, go ahead. Sorry, I
Oh,
didn't
no,
mean
no,
to.
no. Exactly what you say, that nothing happens in isolation, right? So things evolve, and basically every next generation comes up with slightly new ideas. But even though we think that we are always unique and new, and we know it best,
Right.
everything actually is
Uh,
based on what has been before. And it's
yes.
very interesting to me because So it's how in this part of the world, once again, the Chinese, the Japanese, the Koreans, I believe also the Hawaiians, after I heard the anecdotes you mentioned earlier. People believe that, well, once again, everything is in constant change, but, things always move back to some prior state
Right.
and then move forward again.
Yeah.
So it's fascinating to me because I want to say that in one of my courses I took just recently, the teacher talked about the dots connecting backwards and how we don't realize that. And the interesting thing to me is that one of my class, actually two of my classmates, but one of them was very local, who comes from Europe. And so they said, no, that's not true, dots don't connect backwards, because my every decision I make now is a decision that is oriented towards the future. And so it was fascinating to me because the teacher just let that person defend his opinion.
Right.
But I think also that that opinion was shared because that person is still in their early 30s.
Yeah.
So
Which when you're really confident in your 30s, you're right.
yes, yeah.
And then of course everything goes downhill from there, but go ahead.
Right. No, but what I want to say that basically I believe that we understand that the dots connect backwards after we gain a little bit more life experience, because
Self-awareness.
and self-awareness also,
Yeah.
we reflect more, because I think that when I was in my 20s I didn't reflect that much on what I did and what happened. So
Even in my 30s, I wasn't like, and I'm not ever, there are a lot of smart people in their 30s. So don't give, I'm not bashing. You guys are great. I love the 30-year-olds. But there's this, I think confidence, it might be part of our DNA to be confident in our 30s
mhm,
because you're starting to figure things out, right?
right.
Um, but I agree, there's that temptation. The thing is, if you don't leave your own country and experience another, you're not going to understand your own country. You got to get out of your pond to
Hmm.
see what your pond was.
Right.
That's
Yeah.
how it was with me. And I'm still learning, I'm still discovering these like these invisible what the blind spots that we all have, right?
Yes.
So
The
yeah.
blind spots indeed. And
Here's
then
another just a quick
go
so
on.
I was doing this. I was putting together a training program, and it involved lots of countries in Asia. And so I started doing all this research, not just Japan, but Korea,
Hmm.
Taiwan, China, Thailand. And I came across this observation that nearly, if not all, rice cultures are collectives. Talking about going back to the
Yeah.
essence of it. You need each other. You need a group. In this case, it starts off with the first family business in China,
Hmm.
5,000 BC or whatever, right?
Right.
They're growing rice, but you can't do it on your own. You need the group. You need the collective, right?
Hmm.
And you say, well, do the Hawaiians grow rice? No, they grow taro, which is very similar. You're knee deep and it's wet. There's wet rice farming, and then there's wet taro farming where you're knee deep in the mud and you're weeding and
Hmm.
trying to survive, right? So to me, again, going back to its essence, it seems like wet rice farming would have a lot to do with putting importance on the collective, and it would be pretty tough to escape that.
Hmm.
Even though it might get diluted over generations, it still seems to linger because the
Yeah.
collectivism mentality.
Yeah, it seems to linger, and it's also interesting that there was an observation. There is an observation in the book that when you create advertisements of different products, whatever products you might want to advertise, so you have to localize the advertisements to the local culture. And this goes without saying. I think it's a lot of common sense. But what is very specific is that advertisements that focus on the individual, the success of the individual as such, work much, much better in the Western world. And if you want your advertisements to work here, you have to focus on we and our.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
So,
Remember, do you remember the commercial with James Coburn, Speak Lark? It was a cigarette
oh,
commercial. It might have been
no,
before your time. Okay. So there
sorry.
was this commercial. There was this time in Japan when washed up actors were coming to Japan. They were making commercials. Kind of like Lost in Translation kind of story, right? But it was
Hmm.
James Coburn. And I saw an ad company, a local ad company, break down why that commercial was successful. And so the whole commercial is like James Coburn being a secret agent. He's going down these little narrow streets in Japan, and he comes upon this door, and he knocks on the door, and there's a little like a little mini door at the top, and James Coburn pulls out the pack of larks and says, "Speak lark," and they let him in. Okay, that's the
Okay.
commercial. Okay,
Okay.
that was about um, the value on belonging. You're appealing to this value of being a fraction of the
Right.
whole, a special part of a group. And you
Hmm.
have, by smoking lark, you are this, that's your
You
key to
become part of
in this
them.
elite club.
Hmm.
Um, so that kind of, backs up that thesis, right?
Yes, yes. Yeah, there is so much actually which I think that people in advertisement understand it, but yes, we versus I and our versus my, they are really strong, strong, what's that, opposing concepts and parts of the way people see the world and their environments in these parts. But I also wanted to talk just about one more thing,
Sure.
and I think that we mentioned when we talked last week, you and I offline. So the experiment about which Nisbett talks,
I love that. Go for
students,
it.
yes, the
Yeah.
art, but that's the art project is experiment.
Yeah.
So they actually got two groups of students, no, a group of students which is a mixture of Japanese and Canadian students, and there were some other, of course, belonging to the Western and the Eastern cultures, but predominantly Canadian and Japanese. And so they divided the students into two groups and they gave them a task, an art task. And so in each group, there were 50% Eastern and 50% Western students. And so in the one group, the first group, when and they finished the task that the students were told that they had failed. And then in the other group, the students were told that they had succeeded. So what happened basically, the observation was that in the group that had succeeded, the Canadian students, they set that they just what that set out, to improve themselves even more, to become even better because they had succeeded. And then in the other group, which had failed, so the Canadians lost interest, and then the Japanese, they set out to improve themselves
Yeah.
so that they can succeed next time.
Yeah.
And I thought that it was just amazing. And because when I read that experiment and I shared this at home, and then my husband said, "This is us Japanese,"
Yeah. Yeah.
you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, and for this reason, when a Westerner succeeds, the chances for that Westerner to become even better are higher. And when a
Yeah.
Japanese fails, the chances for that Japanese to become better are higher.
That's so funny. That's why we
Isn't
have
it?
pizza parties in American companies when you have a success, and the Japanese have a Hanseikai, a reflection
Yes,
meeting.
a reflection, yes.
Even no matter how successful you are, it's a Hanseikai. So
Yes, that's true. But I mean, we have seen this with all the sportsmen and women here in Japan. Even when they win Olympic medals or they win a competition, the interview inevitably is, of course, I'm grateful, to everybody who supported me, but I still have to improve on this, and this point, and I'll be working on it to get better. And
yeah,
these are people who have, just won medals. They
yeah,
have shown that they're good and at what they're doing and so on and so on. So, and of course, even when they don't win, that Hansei talk is even stronger.
yeah.
So,
Do you
yeah,
think elite athletes in general, across the board, every culture,
mhm,
have a little more of that
I
than
think they
the
do.
average person? Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it takes a certain type of personality to become that successful in something which needs repetitive and very hard exercise.
Yeah. Yeah.
So maybe even Western elite sportsmen, sportswomen, they're probably closer in their mindset to the Japanese
Yes.
way of Kaizen, doing Kaizen,
Yeah.
than the
Yeah.
general population.
And that's why they're elite in
That's
that
why they're
sense.
that's
For
why
that
they're
reason, one reason.
late. Yes, one reason indeed. But yeah, it's really fascinating. And to everybody who hasn't read the book yet, I do recommend it because
Yeah.
it explains so many things and gives you a lot of insight into what you can do in order to be strategic here and to be
Were you
successful.
gonna talk about the fish tank too?
Oh, the fish tank. Yes. Okay, that's yeah, I thought that I lost the chance for that. But yes, the fish tank is about basically two once again groups of students, Japanese and Western students and also Chinese and Korean. They were presented with a picture of a fish tank and asked to describe what they saw after they were presented that picture. And the thing is that the Western students, they focused on the individual objects there.
Right.
And then the East Asian students described the context. Basically, they described the relationships between the objects and not so much the individual objects.
So their detail of the individual objects were more fuzzy, but they caught more of
Yes,
the different things around the main, like the main fish. I remember it as being like a video of a aquarium, and then they turned it off and they asked
yes,
them maybe that
yes.
was it.
Or
But anyway,
maybe a
they
little.
drew. I think they drew pictures
Hmm.
of what
Yes,
they saw. Right,
yeah.
right, right.
And
Which is
also,
fascinating.
it
They
is
were
fascinating.
five. They were 5 years old. So
Yes.
that thinking was already baked into them
Yeah.
at that young age.
It's baked into them, yes, but I hear so many times here in Japan when I'm out and about, and then for example, in the supermarket, mothers scolding their kids, don't run or don't shout because 他の人は困るよ.
Yeah, yeah.
The focus is on others, that other
Yeah,
people are
meiwaku,
trouble.
yeah, not doing that.
迷惑かけない.
Yeah, meiwaku.
かけないでね.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it is, yeah, it's always about the focus is on
Yeah,
on the
how you're
environment.
perceived
Yes,
and
very highly
on the
perceived.
rules. Yeah.
Yeah,
Which has some really nice things, I mean,
very nice.
it's one of
Yes,
the lovely things.
yeah, yes, indeed. But
Mm,
also, just to expand a little bit on this, so basically, they did, Nisbett and his students, they did also another experiment, once again, about fish tanks and so on, with older students, university students. And what they discovered was that the Chinese and Japanese, they remembered better, the things about that picture or video that actually they remember the relationships and they remember the background much better,
I gotcha. Right, 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 right.
right, than
Yeah,
the Westerners. So
yeah,
later on, so once again, it is all about looking for change and how the objects and the events actually are in a fluid state.
yeah.
And
It's
also the
amazing.
Japanese, they remember. It's interesting, another with those students, college students, but also with the kids, that they remember words that are, or they learn much faster words that express relationships,
Yeah, interesting. Yeah,
right? And
yeah,
then the Western kids learn words that express objects or that describe objects much faster
yeah,
than others. So,
yeah, yeah. I mean, relationships is built into the Japanese language.
mhm.
My wife still calls her elder sister One-san. She doesn't call her by her name. She's
Right.
Onesan. That's a
Reason.
relationship. And she's above me in the pecking order. Yeah.
Right.
But she calls my wife by her name, and
Yeah.
she doesn't call her Imoto. She goes, So that's, yeah. Even the labels we put
Mm-hmm.
in is part of those relationships within the hierarchy in this case, right?
Hierarchy, yes. Indeed. Well, yes, there is always, and also another thought that I have been thinking, I have been having recently is that it's a little bit bigger, when we look at the bigger picture and when we think about how the Western world is trying to impose the values of democracy on countries here in the East. And I think that we basically do not understand that this is very difficult to impose something that was created in a different environment, just impose it here in in this part of the world. And also say say about countries that do not embrace our democratic values the way we do, to say that they are not democratic, because it's really different. We cannot use our tools, we cannot our tools to describe something that is entirely different and has developed into a different direction
Yeah.
from
I mean, people have to separate systems and values, right? You can't
yes,
impose values.
yes,
You just come up, okay,
exactly.
everybody, here's the values now. From now on, you're going to do this. That's hearts and
Yeah,
minds. And you can't, it's just impossible. I mean, you might want to think it is, but it's not.
no, it
It's
is not,
it's
because
shogunai.
it's shogunai and the values are baked into the system. I mean,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
when
yeah. Sure,
right,
sure, sure.
because when you talk about how your sister-in-law, right? So your Kurumi-san calls her One-san, but your sister-in-law calls Kurumi-san Kurumi.
Yeah,
So it's, once again, that's how it is.
yeah. And by
So,
the way, I call my sister-in-law One-san too. So
of course,
I'm in the
yes,
system. So yeah,
yeah. I was scolded actually. So maybe 2 or 3 years ago when we went to Nishiizu, and so we have a cousin there, and the funny thing is that so basically, she's my husband's cousin, and she's younger than him, but she's older than me. Okay,
okay.
so she's between us. But I thought that by association, I could call her by name and son, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah, yeah.
No, non-san or non-chan, even
Yeah,
non-chan,
yeah.
because my husband and my mother-in-law called her non-chan. And
Uh,
then when I said non-chan, and I was actually scolded discreetly, how I cannot call her that because, first of all, you're younger, and
yeah, yeah,
next, you
yeah,
didn't grow up with her.
yeah,
So,
yeah, 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 yeah. Yeah, I
right?
know, I
So I
know.
learned a lesson. So I never called her non-chan again.
Yeah,
That's so a big no-no.
yeah.
But
No,
yeah,
there was a time I thought I knew what the rules were, and then I realized, there's exceptions and situations, and I've gotten to the point where I'm like, what should I call you? What would you like me to call you?
yeah,
Just ask them, and then
right.
you can't go wrong if you do that. You just play the dumb foreigner, and you.
Yeah, yeah.
Well, I
Oh,
enjoyed the discussion this morning, my friend. So I know you got to get to our sponsor, and we
yeah.
can let everybody go on this beautiful Wednesday morning in Japan.
Yes, very much so. So thank you very much, Tim, for this. It was really sweet. I love this conversation, and I hope that at some point, the people who listen to us and haven't yet read the book, they will read it so that
Yeah,
they'll get some more,
great book.
yes,
A great
insight
book for
into,
cultivating self awareness on both sides. If you're Asian, Japanese, and other Asian
yes,
countries versus the West, and I think yeah, it was a really good book. I enjoyed it.
yes, me too. And well, once again, a huge thank you from the bottom of our hearts to our sponsors, Kanagawa Chuo Jutaku or Kanchu at kanachu.com, and James Howell, and also Houze Inc. with Hannah Urushizawa Howell. Once again, their contact details are in the description of the video on YouTube, and you can very easily find them on LinkedIn. So do not hesitate, reach out to them and connect with them so that you can work with them if you have any of these projects, or even if you don't. Who knows what happens in the near or the distant future. So thanks a lot, Tim. It was great.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you for showing up.
Thank you.